So we've just seen the developer persona working in the Red Hat Developer Hub, and I like that a lot because unlike last year, the addition of the Red Hat Developer Hub gives us a glue that brings everything together. Under the covers, of course, it's still the OpenShift platform, and the OpenShift platform is doing all the grunt work. But what we're going to talk about now is we're going to move from the inner loop to the outer loop, and we're going to bring in the Ansible automation platform to show you how you can drive through events the automation of infrastructure provision and application deployment. So we're now going to move on to the platform engineer and show you a demo around the automating deployment using the Ansible automation platform.
The Cool Stuff store is expanding, and they want to deploy their two new kiosks at the edge, starting with Dublin and Johannesburg. In order to accomplish this, the platform engineering team needs to deploy container images created by the OpenShift pipelines. The team is using Ansible Automation Platform to deploy their container images, but they're not experts when it comes to creating Ansible playbooks. Because of this, they've turned to Ansible Lightspeed with watsonx Code Assistant. Ansible Lightspeed with watsonx Code Assistant takes away the guessing game by using generative AI to help you create the different tasks that you need for your Ansible playbooks. To showcase this, let's go build an Ansible playbook that's going to deploy 4 container images that make up our Cool Stuff store. Here I'm running VS Code where I'm going to be using Ansible Lightspeed with Watson Code Assistant. The first thing I want to do is create a scaffolding of my Ansible playbook and fill in some details that I know about the environment. Here are some of the key variables and environment variables that I'm going to be using for the 4 different containers that I need in order to deploy the Cool Stuff store. Now that I know what those details are, I can use Ansible Lightspeed to go off and help me generate the tasks that I need. The first thing I'm going to need is a container for my inventory. So let's start there. I'm going to go create Podman container using inventory container var. When I do this, I'm going to press enter, and Lightspeed is going to work and generate me an output. And here you go. I press tab, and now I have access to exactly what I need. Next, I'm going to go off and create my next container that I need. So create Podman container using web container var. When I do this, I'm also going to press enter. I'm going to let Ansible Lightspeed generate me my new Podman container task. And here it is, the output that I have. And then I'm going to do this 2 more times for the different Podman containers that I have left using Spring Boot container var. Press enter. And then lastly, my last container that I need, my Vertex container. Now that I have these, what I want to do is I want to then push them into my repository since I'm going to be using this for the deployment. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to stage my environment. I'm going to give some message for my commit. In this case, I'm going to say creating deployment for edge devices. And I'm going to go off and commit. I'm going to save. And I'm going to hot loud push. And this is how easy it is to use Ansible Lightspeed. I was able to go in, give some variables and environment variables for my Ansible playbook. And then I was able to generate the different tasks that I need to create my different Podman containers. In this case, I needed 4 different Podman containers to go off and do my deployment of the Cool Stuff store. And how exactly is the deployment of the Cool Stuff store done? For that, we head to the automation controller component of Ansible Automation Platform. In here, we will kick off an Ansible workflow template that deploys the Cool Stuff store to each of the corresponding locations in Dublin and Johannesburg. But first, let's take a quick tour of the setup that allows us to do the deployment. Within Automation Controller, you will notice an inventory section. In here, we have set up dynamic inventories. This means that the automation controller will always be aware of the kiosks present at the Dublin and Johannesburg locations. If we add additional kiosks, Ansible will pick those up and include them as part of the deployment process. Automation Controller also provides the capability of running your automation closer to what you're trying to automate. Within the topology view, you can see two external execution nodes labeled Dublin Store and JHB Store for Johannesburg. With the capabilities of Automation Mesh, which is an overlay network that distributes automation across a collection of execution nodes, we can ensure that when the Ansible workflow runs, it uses the appropriate execution nodes for the deployment. What it means for you is you get a faster, more reliable automation process for your deployment. We have also set up notifications that are to be sent to Slack. That way, when our workflow is complete, we get alerted on whether it was successful or had a failure. And finally, before we kick off the deployment of our Cool Stuff store at the edge, we will take a look at our job templates. In here, we have a breakdown of different job templates that configure our edge devices and those that deploy the Cool Store application for Dublin and Johannesburg. We can determine the flow of this automation using a workflow job template called Cool Stuff Store Edge Deployment. When looking at the visualizer of the Ansible workflow template, we can see that we first configure the store kiosk and then the Cool Stuff Store application to each kiosk. And with that, let's kick off the deployment. Once the deployment completes, we will see our Cool Stuff store available and deployed to our edge devices. So let's go check out our different kiosks at the Dublin and Johannesburg store. Here we have our kiosk 1 at the Dublin store, and here we have our kiosk 1 at the Johannesburg. If you notice, the Cool Stuff store has a collection of different items that are made available to purchase. However, the team realizes they have a problem. While they have deployed the Cool Stuff store to the edge devices, they don't have a way to update the inventory of their items in real time as new inventory comes in, which is updated whenever the OpenShift pipelines triggers and creates new container images. To solve this problem, they turn to event-driven Ansible. Event-driven Ansible allows the platform engineering team to listen for specific events and take action against those events. In this case, they will be waiting for the container images to be pushed to their Quay repositories, and once the image is available, it will take an action of automatically triggering the workflow template that deploys to the different kiosk locations. Let's show how to do that. The Cool Stuff Store inventory team has just notified the developer team there is a new shipment of 100 fedoras that just came in. They have been tasked to make the appropriate changes to the inventory. In order to do this, the developer is going to access the Red Hat OpenShift environment, more specifically OpenShift dev spaces, and within dev spaces, they're going to make the appropriate code changes. In here, we'll be updating two files to reflect the changes needed on the Cool Stuff Store app. The first change that we're going to have is we're going to be modifying the inventory from 0 to 100 fedoras, and we're also going to be changing the inventory resource test from 0 to 100 fedoras. With that, we're going to sync our changes and by pushing them up to Git, which is going to trigger an OpenShift pipeline that is going to build the new container images, pushing them to their corresponding Quay repositories and sending a notification to event-driven Ansible that the images are now in place. Now we can head to the OpenShift pipelines and we can see we have a pipeline that has just kicked off. As this pipeline progresses, once it gets to the build sign image portion of the pipeline, this is going to push the images into the Quay repository, which is going to then trigger an event within EDA, event-driven Ansible. Within EDA controller, we can go to the rulebooks activation and we have our Cool Stuff Store EDA demo rulebook activation. Here, we're waiting to see for the environment to be ready and actually showcase that the Cool Stuff Store workflow has been kicked off. And once that's kicked off, we can actually go off and see that within our automation controller, we can see that the workflow has been triggered. And what you're seeing here is that the event that EDA captured with the Quay images being pushed to their Quay repositories, now the deploy app for Dublin kiosk is actually up and running. And now that everything has completed, we can actually go and see, if we refresh our Cool Stuff store, we should be able to see the new inventory properly reflecting the 100 fedoras. And as you can see here, we have 100 fedoras in the Dublin kiosk 1. And if we go to Johannesburg, we now have 100 fedoras available. So to recap, we were able to use Ansible Lightspeed with Watson X Code Assistant to generate our Ansible playbook tasks, and use event-driven Ansible to watch for specific events to trigger our workflow template. Not only did this deploy the Cool Stuff store at our Dublin and Johannesburg locations, but it did it without any intervention from the deployment team.